Good evening, class. If you're in California, I hope you've been safe with all the rattling going on with the earthquakes. It's been quite the talk of the town. So I hope that you're doing okay and that you're safe. If any of you live in Ridgecrest, I hope that you're okay. I am going to be talking to you guys tonight about week 2, which is about the development that's taking place from birth to 2 years old. And there's so much that happens during this phase of a child's life. Some of you may have young children, others of you may have adult children, and some of you don't have children, but that's fine. You've been around children. And there is so much that happens in this brief amount of time. When you look at someone's lifespan and how long they're alive, birth to 2 is such a small amount of time. However, there's so many important things that transpire in this very brief, small amount of time. I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about this coming assignment. And I'm on week 2 in the learning activities, and it's assignment 1, and it's help. How do I raise a baby? And so this is what you're going to be doing. This is going to be an APA assignment. Um, and you're just trying to demonstrate the skills um, about how to raise a baby. So you will act in the parent role, and you'll write letters to a guardian angel asking for some guidance on specific topics that are relevant for the stage that the baby is in. So infancy can include, food, separation anxiety, going to preschool, tantrums, those kinds of things. We want you guys to respond to the letter as a guardian angel. So sharing research, informed, answering, advising. So the parent writes the letter and then the angel responds, if that makes sense. So it's like a reciprocal kind of pen pally type thing. This is meant to be fun, as well as educational. Um, so if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. There are points for creativity, things of that nature. But I just wanted you guys to know that the rubric is listed here in week 2 assignments. Ops in general is really good about laying things out, how papers and things should go. So if you're not familiar with looking in the learning activities, I really suggest you give it a look so that you know how to do assignments pretty explicitly. So we're on chapter 3. And like I mentioned, big age, big time in a person's life, birth to 2. And we're just going to be looking at this um, and just evaluating what's going on in these phases. So a newborn. Right now, my oldest child is 7, and my youngest child is, I have like what's going on in these next few chapters like happening in my home. I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So the newborn stage was not that long ago for me. And so when I'm going through these things, it kind of brings back some memories. Um, but like what we're saying here, newborns alternate between 4 states. So we have they're alert, but they're not necessarily active. They can have their eyes open, and they're just kind of looking around. And you notice that a lot in newborns. They're very calm, but they're just kind of observing. A waking activity, which is their eyes are open and unfocused. And then there might be like there's little jolts of motion. Crying, which we know all about that, right? And then the sleeping. And that happens quite frequently when they're little. Um, Now, there's all kinds of opinions on what parents should do. And as you become therapists and you're talking with your clients, um, I think it's to empower them that, obviously if they have questions, to ask questions, but just because one person does it one way doesn't mean they have to do things that way. They really have choices, and they need to decide on their own what those choices are. But it's so easy. It's so easy that to get so confused and to feel like you're not doing it right. And one, every kid's different, so what you did for one kid may not be the same thing you can do for the other kid, all that kind of stuff. But babies typically have different kinds of cries. There's maybe a more basic cry to a mad cry to a cry which might reveal that maybe they're in pain. Babies sleep 16 to 18 hours a day. And this can look very different how that looks. It could be in 4-hour chunks or whatever. Every little kid is different. Um, and sleeping, like there's all kinds of books just on sleeping. I mean, sleep training and all this stuff. I mean, it can be overwhelming and exhausting, especially for first-time parents. Just already so concerned about wanting to do things correctly, um, and having all these different voices on what they should or shouldn't do. And that's where, again, empowering the parents for them to make a decision, whether it's, of course, it's assuming it's legal and safe and all those things, encouraging them to make decisions based on what they think is best because they're the parent. They can't please all these other people. So again, SIDS is something that happens. A sudden death of an apparently healthy baby. It happens to one to three American babies out of 1,000. So that is something that happens. It's very tragic. Um, there's usually some different risk factors, right? The baby has to usually be between 2 to 4 months old, maybe born prematurely. I think if there's a type of scoring that they do when they're first born, I think sometimes they have like a lower scoring when it comes to their breathing. Potentially parents who are smokers, they sleeping face down versus face up because they talk about suffocation, and having too many blankets or sleepwear. And babies have a harder time regulating their temperature, so getting overheated and then causing them to pass away. Very, very sad. Even in babies, you can see temperament. I would say even in my children, each one of them being very different, um, their temperaments are all very different, and this was pretty much seen from a very young age. Probably if you have children or been around any children, you can see this as well. You can see if the baby likes to be around people, how they feel around sounds. Uh, you can see the things that maybe bother them, make them seem angry or shy or not soothed. And again, some of these things are already coming out even in infancy. Very, very interesting. Um, so again, temperament is one of those things that can be part of genetics or it can be part of how you're being raised. Um, you know, how involved the parents are, if they're involved, if they're attached. Is mom struggling with postpartum depression? Um, they're talking about even culture. Culture could affect the kind of temperament of a child. I feel like my kids' temperaments all got easier as I became more relaxed as a parent. Um, Not saying that's always a beneficial thing, but I think especially in the newborn stage where it's kind of scary and uncertain and all those things, um, I felt more comfortable versus I did my first child. So, and I think that causes the baby to relax too if you're relaxed. So all these things play a role in the very beginning. Um, so okay, so 40% of an infant's energy is sucked up in just their growing. Just look at how much growth happens from being, a tiny baby to even just a 2-year-old. There's a lot that transpires. Um, so again, nursing they encourage. However, um, whatever makes your baby fed and be healthy is what's good for your baby, right? So, there's a lot of moms that suffer guilt from not being able to breastfeed or choosing not to breastfeed. And those are things that, at the end of the day, whether you're able to, not able to, you just hope your baby's healthy and fed. And that's the most important thing. We want your baby to thrive. And a lot of moms come in and they're feeling guilty or ashamed or just really down about that. And there's so much going on at that very beginning time. It's not healthy to be dwelling on that kind of thing. Um, so I really do encourage my clients to not be so hard on themselves and to be so upset because stuff happens and sometimes it's outside of your control, and at the end of the day you just want your baby not to be starving, you know. Usually solid foods are introduced around 6 months. Um, and that again is personal preference as far as if you start before then, but that's usually what the doctor recommends. And we usually introduce food slowly. Now, this may look different in other cultures. I think with one of my sons, I think it was my first son, we were following everything to the book, and I think my mother-in-law wanted to feed him sopa and beans. And I'm like, no, it can't happen yet. And then I think by the time my second son he would look so jealous when we were eating. I think I was giving him pasta like at 5 months, 4 months. So anyways, um, so yeah, so that's a personal, like again, consulting a physician, but you know, how people go about introducing food to their children could look very different. Um, so again, it's personal preference. This is a really sad statistic, but it says here 1 in 4 children worldwide under the age of 5 is malnourished. And this can be damaging because this can have some permanent effects, like the kid will always remain small for their age, can affect the brain. Um, there could be not a lot of energy. Um, it's just really, really sad that kids suffer in that way. But it is a very real, real, real thing. Okay, so this is a lovely part of your nervous system there. It looks like some synapses. Um, so again, so you get the dendrites, the cell body, axon, terminal. So this is what's going on in the brain. So there's a lot of things firing off in a kid's brain during this time. They have neurotransmitters being going, the cerebral cortex region of the brain that controls the higher level of thinking consists of the right and left hemisphere joined by the corpus callosum, and then the frontal cortex, obviously in the front, located at the front of the cerebral cortex. Personality is centered there. So here's a nice little picture of that, right? This portion right here. And all this stuff is very active during this time because there's so much development that's happening, right? And we always have to be so careful with infants, especially with their little heads, because their heads are so soft, and just making sure that we don't do anything to rattle their little brains. By 28 weeks after conception, all the neurons the brain will ever have are formed, which is so amazing. 28 weeks, so amazing. Seeing all these little pieces that fall together from conception to this point, it's so hard to, I don't know how you cannot see God's fine design, because any one thing goes wrong and everything falls apart, but everything's so knitted together so perfectly to work together. It's really amazing. But 28 weeks after conception, all the neurons in the brain will ever have are formed, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so many areas. So when we look at neurology and with brains and kids, many areas specialize in early infancy. So we got language, and that's done in the left hemisphere. And there could be active brain regions that are more focused, or stimuli responsible for brain activity shift from general to specific. So there's a lot of things to study and research in regards to what's going on in a little person's mind, because there's so much development. So, with speech and language, just in general, there's a lot going on with just that. Motor skills. So we got coordinated movements of the muscle and limbs. I think the doctor always asks you about pinching, if your child can grasp or grab things, right? Fine motor skills are associated with grasping, like what I just talked about, holding and manipulating objects, so being able to feed themselves. And you see this in very young children. They start to be able to hold the bottle. Usually when they're grasping, it's like their pointer finger and their thumb It's almost like they're pinching at things, trying to do things on their own. This is showing motion, right? How kids move, their locomotion. So let's see, where to? Okay, so infants use the environment for cues for when to walk. It's so funny because, right, like I said, I have a 1-year-old, and he's been my slowest walker. And in the midst of him turning 1, we were in the process of moving, and we moved from one house to the next house. And our house that we moved into had stairs, and it's the first house that we've had that's had stairs. So we had to get all these baby gates and all these things to prepare for my son being in the home. However, what's interesting is I feel like he's not walking because, um, one, he gets carried a lot because he's the youngest, and two, just our old house was a 1-story, and so he had free reign to walk, to do whatever he wanted. Now my house is not, and so I think as a result, um, we don't feel as comfortable just leaving him certain places if you don't fall. And I think that that has affected a little bit his desire to walk, or his ability to walk as quickly as maybe my other kids did. So it is interesting to see this kind of go about, because I literally did not have this issue with my other children. Like I mentioned, the grasping, coordinating fingers, um, starting to dress or undress themselves, kids, um, because they're at the stage where maybe they're able to pick out their shirts or pick out a little outfit and get changed. And that can be kind of hard depending on what's on your clothes, um, how to snap buttons or pull a zipper up, or, it requires some sort of coordination. So, which is good to start with kids early, right? So infants can smell their families they can recognize family by their smell. Um, they react well to sweet smells and negatively to bad smells, and they can prefer very different tastes. They're also sensitive to touch. Um, Infants best hear sounds in the range of human speech, which is very interesting. Um, Newborns and young babies' vision is much worse than the adults. People always joke about when you see a firstborn baby, they're like, they can't even see you. And partially that may be true. They just don't see as sharply and as keenly. But by 3 months, babies can see a full range of colors, which is pretty amazing. Cues allow infants to infer depth. So genetic cues, um, you know, I'm sorry, I said genetic. Kinetic cues help them to figure out motion, um, what motion parallax what's going to help them to get there faster, being able to see out of their eyes, versions of the same scene, slightly different, pictorial cues, arrangement of objects in the environment. So how are things placed, right? Even newborns readily recognize faces. Young infants focus on independent facial features. Those 7 months and older recognize the face as a whole. And I definitely can see in my son that he recognizes people. Um, Babies can detect relations between visual and auditory stimuli. Brain areas are not yet specialized, making it relatively easy for them to do. Infants are attuned to intersensory redundancy, information presented simultaneously to different sensory modes. So, apparent clapping is both an auditory and a visual stimulus. Very interesting, right? So, self-awareness begins between the ages of 18 to 24 months. Um, They might start to use their name. They might start to use the name of others, maybe know their gender. Um, when they're in preschool, they might be describing themselves in very clear ways, which is so interesting when they start understanding and then formulating sentences and having conversations, and just turning into little people, right? 1-year-olds understand intentionally. Um, a theory of mind, a native understanding of the relationship between mind and behavior. Um, and then around age 4, children understand that behavior is the result of one's beliefs, and language skills or interactions with other people may lead to that theory. Okay, so this is chapter 3, moving right along to chapter 4. Okay, so according to Piaget, children understand the world through schemas. And what that is a psychological structure that organizes experience. Infants group items based on what actions they can perform on them. Preschoolers group by function or concept. Older children and adolescents group by abstract category. So these are some interesting things about Piaget and how he sees everybody seeing the world. Assimilation is the new experiences incorporated into the existing schema. Okay, accommodation schemas are modified based on new experience. So, pre-operational thinking. So there's egocentrism, centration, and appearance as reality. So kids understand and grasp things in very different ways, right? So in egocentrism, the child believes that all people see the world as he or she does, right? And so a child gestures during a telephone conversation like pretending like they are on the phone, right? Um, Centration, the child focuses on an aspect of a problem or situation but ignores other relevant aspects. So um, in a conversation, a child pays attention to the height of the, okay, so if you were given, in this slide, it shows it actually really well. So if you have these two cups, a kid would think this is automatically more, even though that this is the same. It's hard for them to understand those kinds of concepts just because their little minds haven't necessarily adjusted to those kinds of things. All right. Same with this kind of situation, right? It's interesting. The appearance as reality. The child assumes that an object is real. An object really is what it appears to be. Um, a child believes that a person smiling at another person is really happy, even though the other person is being mean. They just can't interpret those things. They don't understand them yet. Okay. So there's some criticism of Piaget, which, welcome to everybody has criticism about something, right? They think it underestimates the cognitive competence in infants and young children and overestimates the competence in adolescents. Does not account for variability, undervalues the influence of the sociocultural environment. Let's see here. Research shows that babies understand objects at an earlier age than shown by Piaget, that at 4.5 months old show some understanding of object permanence, and at 5 months old expect liquids to change to shapes. Which, this is, again, going against what he thought, but hey, that's why they call it a theory, right? Nothing is exactly 100% spot on. And that's what's so interesting about all this stuff. And this is why this can get so confusing. And as a clinician, it's so important for your clients. Well, one, you want to put it back on them to make those kinds of decisions, but helping them understand that there's not necessarily a right or wrong to everything, because there's so many different opinions and things to think and to feel. It can be very overwhelming. Very, very overwhelming. By 12 to 15 months, toddlers understand several properties of inanimate objects. By age of 4, several elements compose a naive theory of biology. So growth, animals, objects get bigger with time. Internal parts, human has blood and bones. Inheritance, so we might resemble each other because we're family. And then healing. Their hair will grow back, but the dollies won't, right? The kid that gets the scissors and cut their bangs, well, at least our bangs will grow back. I cut Barbie's hair and all of it is gone, right? That's the unfortunate part. And I wanted to talk to you guys about. Here we go. So these are some of the things that infants will pick up on: imitation. So if you can stick your tongue out or smile at a kid and it's going to copy you, right? Or you do peekaboo and you cover your eyes and the kid will cover their eyes, which is really, really, really sweet. So 3 important features of memory. There's usually events from the past that are remembered, events that over time, the events can be hard to remember, and then something can trigger a memory, right? Memory will continue to grow and develop once a child is born, right? And there's that lovely brain again, right? There's the hypothalamus, which is helpful there, the thalamus, hippocampus, and amygdala. Very, very cool. There's so much activity in these parts of our brain, which is interesting. Very, very interesting. Memory and some of these cognitive type tests can be done in school systems, especially if a parent is concerned about their child. They can access like maybe a school psychologist to do some testing if they are concerned. I know like Inland Regional Center, I know at one point came to my home because I was concerned about my eldest son. And she showed no cause for concern, but it was really nice to have the ability for someone to come out and kind of evaluate things. I think sometimes we assume our kids know and understand things, even though they have to be taught, and that's up to you as a parent to teach them, especially a first-time parent. Maybe you just don't have everything quite figured out yet. And that's why you know, um, it's so good to not put a lot of pressure on people because they're going to have to figure it out. And are there going to be bumps in the road? Absolutely. But we don't need to impose so many things on people, you know? So I think that's it for this evening. Thank you so much for listening to this. There's so much information here to cover. It's so easy to get caught up in and taking a really long time trying to explain it all to you guys. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm so excited for what you're learning and look forward to looking at your projects. Please email me or call if you have any questions or concerns. Again, thank you so much. Good night.